So good morning, everyone. Before we get started, I wanted to quickly set the stage so you all have some context for what we're doing. My name is Peter. I'm a senior associate here at 500, and my job is largely to work with a number of corporate investors and corporate innovators on projects related to startup investment and startup partnerships. And so this event is being hosted as a part of our ongoing Slack community called 500 VC. 500 VC is an invite-only Slack community for corporate and institutional investors to engage in helpful conversation, networking, and ultimately empower founders. We host networking events, startup presentations, and discussion series like this one. And so within this Slack group, we started the Corporate Venturing channel to be a collaborative community through which members can share best practices and learnings, as well as enhance the perception of CVC among the startup ecosystem. And so if you're at all interested in joining, I'm going to go ahead and drop my email in the chat now. And so you can feel free to shoot me an email or Sean. And so this event in particular is a bi-weekly speaker series featuring top corporate venturing practitioners sharing their unique journey to CVC, specific challenges, and best practices they've developed as a result. And so I'll leave it to our host, Nicolas, to introduce our guest for today in a second. But first, I wanted to share a couple quick housekeeping items. The first is please ask questions if you have them. One of the best things about us doing these live webinars is the insightful questions that you all ask. And so please feel free to drop them in the chat whenever. We will have a live Q&A at the end, and we'll continue to kind of answer those questions as we go. And then secondly, we may launch some polls during this just to kind of get a sense of the audience, may or may not. And so if you see a poll pop up, feel free to answer it. All right, so now that you all know what's going on, I'm gonna go ahead and hand it over to Nicolas to kick things off. Enjoy.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you 500 Startups for making this happen. Today, I'm very happy to have Victoria Slivkoff, Global Head of Innovation and Entrepreneurship at the UC Office of the President, talking to us. And if you remember, 2 weeks ago, we had a very good interview with Jen from NASA. And towards the end, she talked about the importance to know how to engage with universities. And so I'm so glad to have Victoria today to talk about her role, what she's doing, the innovation that comes from that, and to have a sense of the powerhouse of innovation that she's really harnessing. So Victoria, without further ado, you have 5 to 10 minutes to introduce yourself, but also your initiatives, and please be the startup that you always coach others to be. I look forward to hearing from you.
Great, thanks for having me. Hello to everyone joining on the call today. I wanted to start by thanking Nicolas and the 500 Startups team for convening this series of discussions. And I really enjoyed the last 2 interviews. I'm really excited today to share a bit about the University of California's system-wide innovation and entrepreneurship enterprise and how we work with external partners. Then I'll look to Nicolas to drive the conversations. Next slide, please. Do we have the slide up?
Peter, do we have the slides up?
Oh, let me go ahead and see if I can load those. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Okay,
I don't know if I
I'll
actually
just
have
continue
those.
on, it's okay. I'm on the second slide.
Okay.
Yeah, so I've been with the UC Office of the President for the past 3 years. As a system headquarters, the Office of the President, or OP, provides centralized governance for the system by managing the $40 billion operating budget and over $120 billion in investments, and coordinating activities that allow this vast ecosystem to operate efficiently as one university. And my role is to manage the system-wide innovation and entrepreneurship enterprise. And this office was established 4 years ago to bring greater synergies across the system, comprised of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national laboratories, 4 institutes for science and innovation, and a California statewide agriculture and natural resources division. So we're a 4-year-old unit, and we continue to evolve to better serve the needs of our communities. I'm really passionate about building this vast and vibrant ecosystem that creates companies, we expand the economy, and most importantly, we democratize innovation and entrepreneurship to create social and economic mobility for all. Came to UC from the private sector with a broad background in operations, strategy, and financial management. At my last role, working for a family office in this clean tech venture arm, I operated and invested in public-private partnerships. in taking emerging renewable technologies to market, predominantly in Latin America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And prior to that, at the height of the solar boom, 1.0, I joined a solar company leading corporate development and investor relations, and that was quite a ride. And also I had a stint as a startup co-founder. So if you step back and look at my career journey, I didn't follow a linear path, but I think that my broad experience, especially the ability to wear many hats and deliver on a strategic, operational, and relationship level really prepared me for this role at UC. So going back to my unit, the mission of my office is to increase UC's innovation capabilities in services of our mission to promote public benefit and economic growth. And what that means is transforming the intellectual and innovation capital of UC through internal coordination and external partnerships with corporates, investors, government, and foundations. And there are 6 key areas of functions that we serve to enable that transformation. Increase system-wide coordination, secure funding, create easier pathways to work with you all, map where our innovation and startup activities lie, and support faculty, student, alumni, entrepreneurs, and lastly, promoting UC's impact. Next slide, please. So as the largest public research university system in the US, we're really an innovation powerhouse, as Nicolas said in the introduction. And this slide just gives you a sense of the vastness and richness of our innovation ecosystem. And I just want to share a few highlights. We're the largest recipient of federal research funding. UC conducts nearly 10% of all academic research in the country. We have the largest IP portfolio of any university in the US. UC averages 5 inventions per day. We have 60 incubators, accelerators, and that's almost doubling from 5 years ago. So we've seen this exciting explosion of regional innovation ecosystems around our campuses throughout the state. And we have a number of industry engagement programs and innovation hubs, and we continue to see more industry partnerships through these multi-campus initiatives. And let's not forget that we have amazing people. The faculty, students, alumni, founders, innovators and staff who continue to strengthen our position at the forefront of research, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Next slide, please. Now let's look at our ecosystem through an economic productivity lens. And UC has a long history of delivering technologies that benefits the state of California and beyond. And our impact really extends beyond the campus borders to creating rich regional, statewide, extending to nationwide and global opportunities. And here's some really interesting stats. 1 in 46 jobs in California is supported by UC operations. UC activities generate over 46 billion in economic impact and contribute over 32 billion to the gross state product. In terms of spinouts, collectively, they generated 21 billion revenue and raised 6 billion in funding. And then also, but there's more to do here. In terms of spinouts, I think we can be more intentional with venture creation, taking IPs with high commercialization value, and then marrying that with seasoned entrepreneurs, operators, and VCs to build companies that can deliver massive value. And while not everybody's going to work in tech, but our state economy as a whole really benefits from the prosperity created by tech. And through these activities, there's this ripple effect of stimulating economic activities in surrounding regions and communities. So now let's take a look at university and industry collaboration. Next slide, please. I just want to set the scene a little bit. Over the last decade, we've seen an explosion in university industry partnerships as companies look towards universities as a source of innovation and entrepreneurship. Our labs serve as the R&D arms of the industry, and our incubators, accelerators serve as deal flow to VCs and CVCs. And we're seeing that increased engagement across various nodes: sponsored research, startup investment, partnership and mentorship with startups, workforce development, tech commercialization, and venture creation. And really this trend is anchored around our common goals of bringing solutions to market and this mutual desire to build long-term sustainable relationship instead of the one-off transactional ones. And we really see this as a symbiotic one because innovation is happening at a faster pace and on a grander scale. Industry benefits from universities taking on some of these early risks, of R&D, and then can utilize that visibility to invest in future technologies. And then in turn, us at universities benefit from the industry's resources and know-how for technology translation and workforce development. Next slide, please. So with that relationship in mind, then what are some of the levers that we can pull to create these long-term sustainable collaboration models that enable both sides to stay connected throughout this innovation process, from early stage research to venture creation and scaling? So here are just 6 for us to think through and introduce some topics. The first is physical proximity, companies establishing presence close to universities, see early stage translation, and invest in early stage startups so that you have visibility to that innovation pipeline, and then can be very intentional with alignment with your corporate strategy. Cultivate institutional level relationships rather than just with individuals. And in case of UC, my office can serve in that function to help to create them. And increase diversity, and this goes beyond ethnic or racial diversity to include diversity in background and expertise. And also UC has 10 campuses throughout Northern, Southern California. We're in the Central Valley and Inland Empire. So we're geographically diverse in addition to a variety of campus sizes and specialties. And each has something unique to offer. In fact, there's some pretty amazing innovations taking place across our smaller campuses. So I would love for you to connect with those PIs and founders. And my office serves as that conduit to match investors and donors to UC startups and innovators, so that we can collaborate. The next, it talks about workforce development, and this speaks to internships, fellowships, capstone projects, and faculty sabbatical in industry. And then lastly, bridging the cultural differences, understanding each other's expectations and needs, and then working to meet at the middle. And all these levers collectively create these connectivities that make up a really rich ecosystem. Next slide, please. And thinking about building that rich ecosystem, we want to introduce as much connectivity between the nodes as possible. So this is a very vast and complex ecosystem. And we've seen that innovation thrive in these dense networks because the innovation process itself is not linear. And this really, really takes a village to do this. So involving everybody from entrepreneurs and industry, university, government, philanthropy, pair with risk capital, build on strong infrastructure, and then enabled by policies in order to make all of that happen. So next slide, please. And now I want to share some of the examples of these public-private partnerships that you see. 20 years ago, the 4 California Institutes for Science and Innovation were launched as a partnership. And at that time, it was an unprecedented partnership between the state, UC, and private sector to support the advancement in fields that California identify as central to its economic growth. So in biomedicine, bioengineering, nanosystems, telecom, and information technology. And the shared vision of these multi-campus institutes is to address societal's grand challenges through interdisciplinary research and new market applications. So next slide, I'm also just going to share some additional examples of this UC public-private partnerships. Oh, wait, one up. One slide up, please. Yeah, right here. So let me just share with you a couple of additional examples of this UC public-private partnerships. Starting from the upper left-hand corner, Vine is an innovation hub for ag, food, health tech led by UC Agriculture and Natural Resources Division. Moffett Field Project is a partnership led by UC Berkeley with NASA and the private sector to create a space innovation hub. Aggie Square is an innovation center jointly developed by UC Davis, the city of Sacramento, and industry to spur economic growth in the city of Sacramento. XTC is a Tech for Good global competition launched by Samsung to nurture startups working to solve grand challenges. And UC is a proud founding partner, and this is really a fruitful relationship for UC startups to reach that global network of investors and corporate networks as part of XTC. And finally, the Laboratory for Genomics Institute research as a collaboration between UCSF, UC Berkeley, and GSK. So now I'm going to go to that last slide talking about the proof of concept funding, which is a big initiative for us this year. So as you can see, UC has the infrastructure, the talent, expertise by which strategies can be developed and implemented to drive economic impact and public benefit. This year, one of our signature initiatives is to raise a POC fund for technologies that are at the cusp of commercialization and needing that extra push just to get through the technology and market validations. So there are a variety of POC funds existing across the campuses and labs, but we really recognize that we need a strong push to create a bigger vehicle. And our system has a track record of leveraging grant funding to achieve a multiplier effect in downstream technology development and commercialization. So I'll give you an example of funding received from the state 3 years ago towards UC's innovation and entrepreneurship infrastructure. We generated 14x ROI on the state's initial investment of $22 million. A third of that money went into POC funds, and it helps to create these new startups and launch new products. And again, I've heard loud and clear from my colleagues that they want more of that POC funding. So the thinking behind this new POC fund is to threefold: de-risk technology so that the companies or technologies are more investor ready, work with industry to actively create companies based on our IP, and then support research translation. Our ideal partners are looking for an early look into the deal flow from UC or looking to drive impact through breakthroughs in innovations. And our thoughts around sustainability investment in this area will be supplemented through matching PIs with smart capital and entrepreneurs and operators, tapping to a network of EIRs. And then and I'm personally really passionate about building specific programs to support minority and underrepresented communities. So as that wraps up my overview, love to connect with VCs or CVCs who would like to work with UC. Back to you, Nicolas.
Thank you, Victoria, and you were very good and on time, so this is really, really good. And
I've been warned.
thank you. So it's a treat to have you today because you are clearly an amazing example of a well-run, and I'm sure you will say it can always be improved, but a well-run innovation powerhouse. And I want to maybe ask a very open questions. One is, what is an initiative you're most proud about in the last 4 years? And then maybe you can talk about what has been the most challenging aspect in the last 4 years.
Yeah, I would start with what am I most proud about? I think what I'm really most proud about is about 15 months ago when we had a leadership transition in the unit, I was asked by UC leadership and specifically the Board of Regents to look at how we can develop a new strategic roadmap for this unit. Because as I said, we're sort of a startup, right? We're a new unit and we will continue to understand our customer needs and pivot. So I quickly had to talk with the campuses and my customers to understand what their needs are, and then develop a strategic plan with these 6 core functionalities that truly service the needs of the campuses and the labs, and then presented that to the Board of Regents 2 months later. So I had to quickly put together that plan, deploy it, start launching monthly calls to convene this innovation and entrepreneurship. We'll just use I&E going forward to convene this community so that we can share best practices and opportunities. So this is something that the system, our campus colleagues have been looking to do. So I'm really happy to pull that community together and create better synergies and coordination. So that's what I'm most proud about. I would say most challenging one. I would say challenging is the other side of that is quickly pivot, quickly understanding the needs of the system, which can be really, really diverse, finding commonalities, identifying where we can add value on the OP, the Office of President level, while being, sort of cognizant of not stepping on toes or not creating conflicts or not adding value to the campuses. So I think the challenging side is to navigate through these relationships and different layers of governance, and then trying to come up with a plan and a model that everybody can align to. And so I ended up presenting to the Board of Regents. with campus colleagues at the table with me presenting this plan, which really shows that the coalition. Mm-hmm.
And given your diverse background and all the experience you had, do you have any tip about how to make it smoother?
I think, you know, as I talk about this transformation process from point A, right, to point B, we really have to look at the efficiencies. So I think how to make that smoother in the context of corporate relationship is, you know, coming together with a mutual understanding what the expectations are, right? So that's one. Two is structurally have the infrastructure in place so these relationships can be built, right? So we can, you know, I talked about the 4 institutes for science and technology, and they were stood up as multi-campus entities, specifically working with government and industries to solve these grand challenges. So 2 is infrastructure. 3, I think, is removing barriers, and that could be, I'll just give some examples of trying to standardize licensing, or some aspects of the licensing agreement, standardize some of the workflows so that we can make this process as efficient as possible for both sides. And also, you know, I'm always going back to the funding piece as, you know, we need capital in all stages of development, from early stage grant to, you know, to venture investment on the other side, and then folks that are willing to help and work with our entrepreneurs to help them be successful.
Very nice. And it's a perfect segue to, and I'm not surprised the audience is asking about it, your POC fund.
Yes.
And before I talk, I will take a question from Anita, but before that, I want to set the context. You talked about multiplier effect. Mm-hmm. Is that one of your funding criteria? And if so, how do you assess, measure this multiplier effect?
Yeah, so I'll give an example from the state investment that was made to UC 4 years ago, $22 million through Assembly Bill 2664. How we measure multiplier effect is matching funds raised, whether it's grant funding or investment funding, the number of startups created, which is about over 500, the number of products launched, and that was over 160 products launched with support for that money, and also the follow-on funding attracted by the startups. So collectively, that represented a 14x ROI. So really thinking about being really thoughtful about utilizing that initial investment and try to amplify that.
Actually, 14x ROI is amazing.
In 2 years.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that was a pitch you didn't mention before, but that's a really old pitch. But this is after the fact. When you're looking at all these opportunities to fund, you need to make decisions. How do you have this assessment of which one will have the biggest multiplier effect?
Yeah, so that's really a campus level decision down to a program level, because my colleagues on the ground are the closest to the startups, to the actions. So really, you know, different levels of involvement where I can add value, and then the deployment is really dependent on the colleagues, you know, running the incubator, accelerator, and campus projects to make those decisions. Mm-hmm.
Very nice. So I'll go to Anita's question. So POC Fund sounds fantastic. As part of Citrus Foundry, how would you recommend we attempt to access this?
Yeah, so Citrus is one of the 4 institutes for science and innovation at UC. So, so I'm focusing on fundraising right now, and then you know, we will be having those conversations with campus I&E leaders, innovation entrepreneurship program leaders, to decide if this is something that wants to be administered centrally, or is it something we want to do with the last round of state funding, is just appropriating that money to the campuses equally, and then they can make those campus level decisions about how to deploy those funds.
Okay, very nice. Now, it looks like I've been too soft on my questions, so I'm going to take one that's from Quentin. What would you say your program's niche are, e.g. the top 3 things your program does to advance and accelerate innovation? Basically, what makes your office different?
Oh, I think my office is different because we sit at the headquarters of the UC system. So I think what really makes us unique is that we have every technology vertical you can think of in every stages of development. So a lot of times people think that university innovations are mostly early, and that's not untrue, but we also have lots of technologies and startups that are mature, they're in a later stage. So I think that's what makes us really unique, is that diversity.
Now, one question is, you have so many things going on. Is there a place where someone can go on a website and understand all this technology, all these point of entries? I mean, it's daunting. So is there a way where people can get started?
So you're plugging into number 5 of my 6 core functions, which is ecosystem mapping. That's exactly what we want to move to, is create this, creating some sort of a mapping that will identify where innovation assets lie. So it could be, startups, founders, researchers, IPs, and also, resources and assets. So that's something that we're thinking about and discussing it with the campuses, and try to move towards that direction. But I would love to hear from a campus perspective or industry perspective about, how we can work together to make that happen.
Okay, so for now, it's better to come to you.
Yeah, and think of me as someone who can just, be a conduit to these relationships.
Very nice. Actually, I can vouch for that, because when we first met in January and you mentioned your role, I introduced you to Starship and to Wiz, because they wanted to be able to contribute to campuses, and you were so fast to help them and to point them in the right direction. So I definitively appreciated how you could help very quickly 2 of our startups. So that was really nice.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah.
No, thank you. When you talk about ecosystem mapping, a number of our audience will be from corporate VC.
Mm-hmm.
How would you recommend these corporate VCs to engage, of course, with you, but also more generally with universities?
More generally with universities, I think you have to figure out where the entry points are. And I think it's really moving from the model of having transactional relationships, one-offs with PIs, to really looking at institutional level relationships. So thinking long-term about, how do you want to leverage the vast resources and intellectual capital of the universities that really map to your corporate strategy, and then, start from there.
And could you talk a little about the care about of the universities? Because at the end, for corporate VCs to know how to engage with universities, they should have an appreciation about what university cares about. Your presentation is great because it shows all the multiplier effects, the benefits to the state and to the country and all of that. But what it is that universities really care about, that corporate VCs need to understand before they even engage with them.
What do universities want to understand or care about, right, before engaging with corporate ventures? I think it's aligning objectives. I think from universities understanding, what are the expectations from the corporate side, in terms of engaging with UC or with universities in general. And from the university side, maybe stepping back and maybe helping to sketch out what is the holistic view of that relationship, right? So maybe the initial conversation could be about, getting plugged into our startup deal flow, but maybe there are other ways to engage that corporate relationship so that it could be more sustainable.
Very nice. And of course, we have a very distributed audience. So I see questions that are going to be about how would a startup in another state get support from your office? I have another question, which is about, are you looking for international projects also? Is it possible for a non-US startup to apply? Please tell us.
Yeah, so I'll start with the first one. So how do out-of-state startups engage? So if you are a UC affiliate startup, meaning that a startup founded by UC students, faculty, staff, or alum, we will help you, and we will, you have access to our resources, through that affiliation. And what was the second question? It was, the third question is about international engagement, right?
Yeah, international and non-US startups.
Yeah, so non-US startups, actually several of our incubators, accelerators are starting to open up and accept startups from non-UC affiliations. So, for instance, Berkeley Skydeck is a good example. They, accept even international startups applications. So, I think we're becoming more and more welcoming and opening to startups from the entire community. And the last piece is on international engagement. yes, we recognize that we really, all are part of this global community, and there's a tremendous amount of value to identify these high growth, high potential international markets, and then working with local partners to create essentially, soft landing spots for our entrepreneurs to access that market. And it has to be through, strong local partnerships. So I love to explore those areas.
Very nice. So thank you, Lucas and Quentin, for your questions. So before the interview, Victoria, we talked about these opportunity zones government initiatives. And I don't think many people know about them. Can you give a little introduction and the value they have?
Yeah, so the high level is that, the government has designated certain zones that need economic, spur economic development. So they designate them as opportunity zones and have specific policies to provide incentives to attract companies to establish headquarters there. So really thinking about as a way from a policy perspective to democratize opportunities and shift some of the economic prosperities that we see in big cities, spread them more evenly throughout. I can just speak about California.
Okay, thank you. One slide I liked is the one where you look basically at the ecosystem, the mapping, but also the goals. And you talked about increasing diversity, and I like the fact that you have quite some granularity around diversity. Mm-hmm. And do you mind giving maybe a deep dive into how you look at that, and how do you measure it? How do you track it? How do you encourage it?
Yes, so we have my colleagues at UCOP. We have a whole unit that tracks these engagement metrics and dashboards. So from my point of view, first you have to recognize that diversity exists, right? The big and smaller campuses and different, racial, demographic diversity, as well as diversity of people's background, domain expertise. So I'll give an example of one of the things I'm working on right now as part of the advisory council to look at how we can enhance our ecosystem is how to encourage faculty to pursue innovation entrepreneurship. And as part of that, sending out a survey to understand, if their diverse background is being rewarded, do we have the right incentives in place to promote, sort of diverse engagement from faculty into entrepreneurship, and really come up with some insights from that. From student and entrepreneur engagement, yes, we do track, women. Are we funding women-led or minority-led companies? Are they properly represented, right, in the companies that we admit to our cohorts? And what are some of the specific programs we have around supporting entrepreneurs? So it could be going back to that AB 2664 money. Some of that money went into, for example, creating legal services for entrepreneurs for the Central Valley, right? More connectivity and collaborations between the smaller and bigger campuses, so that you can introduce that diversity, and really opening up this innovation entrepreneurship ecosystem to not just folks from STEM backgrounds, but also, people from non-STEM backgrounds. We'd love to work with folks from the humanity and arts background in order for this to be a truly diverse community. Very nice.
And because you do all this tracking, you can see what is improving. Mm-hmm. And so as a follow-up question is, what do you think you could do even better in that space?
Well, the work is never done. So I think we have to be really thoughtful about not just saying, okay, we've done these few things and now we're okay, we addressed the issues. I think it has to be built into our values, which it is, our principles, guiding principles and objectives, so that it's tightly weaved into, sort of strategy level and principle level thinking. So I think, going back to proof of concept funding, funding is the most direct way to support our entrepreneurs. That's why I'm very focused on raising a proof of concept fund so that we can allocate more resources in a very tangible way to help entrepreneurs, specifically minority entrepreneurs.
I think that's a very important point, because from what I see, it's really at the start of the pipeline, the startup pipeline, that you can really make a difference and encourage and support diversity. And it's not when you get to series A, B, or C that you really have an impact. And so maybe it leads to my next question, which was about mentorship, which is one of the slides you had about engagement points. How do you drive this mentorship? How do you guide it into the right directions? Because it could be going everywhere. So I'm sure you have some kind of guidelines and guidance. So can you walk us through how you think about mentorship?
Yeah, so, map it to our 60 incubators and accelerators across the system. Each of them have developed this network of mentors. I think one of the things I'd love to introduce is, and especially now we're working in a virtual environment, to enlarge that what is right now regional connectivity to mentors to more of a broader connections, right? So that's one. And then there are best practices of engagement, right? Are we tracking that engagement? Are we appropriately matching mentors to the right founders? Are we following up on in terms of feedback from the mentor side as well as from the startup side? That are you all getting value out of that relationships? So some of our campuses are also using tools to help facilitate these online coaching sessions, and then also collecting metrics so that we continuously improve upon that process.
Very nice. I wonder if, because of the pandemic, all the mentorship is moving online, if actually this is not a positive thing for mentorship to move online, where it can happen much more distributed, but also in the safety of your own home versus having to go somewhere physical. So I wonder if you can speak to how mentorship is improved by moving more and more online, which you already mentioned.
Yeah, I think this whole digital transformation and sort of the speed of getting us there, it's been some way positive, because now people are more accessible, right? Instead of having face-to-face meetings, you can do it virtually, meaning that you're really opening up your network of mentors to folks from all parts of the world. So I think it's tremendously positive, because it introduces more relationships, right? Particularly engaging with, international VCs and global CVCs, that it really introduces another network of opportunities that our startups can tap into.
Yeah, I'm also hoping this digital transformation is going to be an equalizer force. So I'm really looking forward to that. In your engagement point slide, I don't see corporate VC spelled out, but I'm sure it's somewhere. Can you tell us, and I know it is because we met at a corporate VC event, so clearly this is an important element for engaging with VC. So can you give us a view of what you think is different about corporate VCs versus every other partners you have?
Oh, I'm sorry. It's all lumped into industry. I think it was abbreviated. But yes, we really value our relationship with corporate VCs, as you mentioned. UC has been participating in GCVI, Global Corporate Venturing and Innovation Summit, for the last few years, where we feature a pitch showcase from UC that essentially really shows you deal flow from the entire system. So we really think the CVC community is an important partner to our ecosystem, because a lot of times that you have long-term strategic plans, you can be not just investors but also customers, strategic partners, and potential acquirers of these startup companies. So we really enjoy the relationship building with CVCs, and recognize the tremendous values that you bring to the table in terms of not just funding, but access to relationships, to networks, access to, let's say, R&D or commercialization know-hows, and access to market channels.
Yeah. So it's way beyond capital.
Exactly.
Very nice. So we've been very nice to corporate VCs, but is there one bad practice you've seen, and you won't need to name names, but is there one bad practice of corporate VC you've seen and you wish would disappear?
I have not. I think
you don't need to be nice.
I know I'm not, but I'm thinking really hard, and I haven't. I really enjoy building a network with CVCs, and I see the symbiotic value of us working together. If anything, it's all been really positive. I think in addition to capital, in order for startups to move along the stages of development is validation points, right? And we have to get that done through pilot projects and having customers. So I think the CVCs really serve as a key role to help with that aspect. So I've had nothing but great experience with working with CVC. In fact, I really want to strengthen that relationship and really speaking with all of you in the CVC community about how we can build these large scale, multi-campus and more sustainable engagement models.
Very nice. And I think I want to give credit to GCV, so
Yeah.
the Global Corporate Venturing initiative, because I think they really are helping to raise the bar in the CVC industry and making sure that best practices are understood and executed and bad practices are avoided. So actually recently I was talking to Jim, who leads it, because he was calling out on some of the smoke, like we call it, with all these concerns about Amazon and the fact that maybe confidential information was shared and so on. I actually don't think it happened, but I can imagine the perception could be there. And I like the fact that Jim, in one of his newsletter, was calling out on this. He was saying, this cannot happen. This is bad for the CVC industry if that perception is that a startup share a lot of information to a CVC and that information could be shared back to the mothership. So I'm glad to see that you have only good things to say about CVCs. So maybe I could ask a question, which is about, if you were to think about an ideal CVC working with you, what would they look like? Would they be big? Would they be small? Would they be very focused? Would they have a range of services? If you were to say, what would be the golden CVC for you to engage with?
Oh, I think that could be really diverse, just because our asset base is very diverse, but I think the size is not what matters to me. I think is that we're aligned on values, right? We have this mutual goal of working together to move groundbreaking research, to the marketplace. I think aligning on value is one. I think someone who can plan with us and so that we can have sort of understand what the long-term strategic vision is for the CVCs, and then we can try to map our resources and our startup activities, our deal flow to that. I think someone who's very opening to being customers, right, or pilot partners to our startups as we're really trying to just bring our solutions to market. So I think those are the sort of the key attributes that would make this relationship very fruitful for both sides.
Very nice. And I think it builds on what you said about ecosystem building, which is innovation thrives in dense networks, which means you need very different type of CVCs to engage, and the wide spectrum is actually enhancing that density and that quality of the network.
Right.
So I have a question from the audience asking, what is CDC, Community Development Council?
Did I talk about that?
I don't remember, so.
Maybe Quentin can clarify that.
Yeah, Quentin, if you
but I think broadly is in terms of community engagement, that we're really thinking about driving public benefit as well as economic growth, right? So give an example of Aggie Square, right? So this is a partnership between UC Davis and the city of Sacramento and private sectors to intentionally spur innovations in this ecosystem to drive the economic development of Sacramento. So I think it's being very intentional about working with the community so that we're aligning our objectives and bring this greater prosperity, again, democratizing opportunities, right? So we're not going to have big cities that are really benefiting from this economic boon, and then really thinking about how to create social benefit and economic benefit for all.
Very nice. So I had a very different question, which is about your incubators. You mentioned you have more than 60 of them. Is that not too many?
I don't know. I guess we continue to have a need, right, to create these incubators. I mean, but we have 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, and 3 national laboratories. So I think and then we have incubators that are more general topic, and we have incubators that are more specific, like to, biotech and deep tech. So I think it is not, it's not just the number of incubators, but sort of the network effect of you're seeing more incubators even working together on some of the programming and so forth. So I think is really looking at the connectivity. But I have not seen that, it has the number of incubators has been a bottleneck to us.
And so would you say that if it grows to 100, this is actually a good thing, as long as they're connected to each other?
Well, I mean, we really have to think what the needs are, right? So the incubator accelerators are like physical spaces, right, with mentors and programming, but do we need more of these, right? Are we looking more of a virtual incubator model where we can just introduce more connectivities? So I don't know necessarily if the number of incubator or accelerators what we need, or is it, more connectivity between those, or introducing more funding and resources to them to help them expand, right? Within their own ecosystems.
Very nice. Now I'm going to ask a question from the audience, which I think is the toughest of all, especially I think when we think about post-COVID-19. So I think there will be, I don't necessarily want to anchor the questions, but the world will be different as a consequence of what's happening today. His question is, what do you think will be the 2021 trends in VC?
So a couple of key observations, right? You talk about digital transformation, the traditional brick and mortar businesses moving online and at a faster rate. So I think that is sort of the overall theme that I'm sure VCs, investors like yourselves are interested in looking at. So that talks about how do you, what about the tools that enable online collaboration, right? What about some of the tools to increase productivity? What about, investing in, shifting brick and mortar operations to online, right? And also I think the data analytics aspect is really exciting, because as more transactions or more activities are taking place in the virtual space, then how can we be more thoughtful about harnessing the data, right? To really think about that overall strategy. And associated with that is looking at privacy issues and cybersecurity implications of this rapid digitalization of the economy.
Yeah, I think that would be a big change. If I look at our portfolio company, Starship is one where we invested a year ago, and everyone was saying, why would you want to have robots delivering food? You could have people doing it. And now, of course, people are not pushing back, and cities are asking for this service. Another thing I saw is mass manufacturing becoming more and more distributed locally. So last week we announced we invested in Origin, which is additive manufacturing. And we see a future where more and more will be produced locally. And to us, this is actually a way of looking at the future that's also more respectful.
Yeah, because I think what this pandemic has highlighted is the vulnerability in our supply chain, right? The last few decades, supply chain has moved to different parts of the world where it makes sense economically, but looking at how our supply chains are being disrupted due to this pandemic, and then what is the value of bringing in a more regional manufacturing strategy and really value the speed to market, right? As opposed to just sort of a cost basis. So seeing some, decentralized around that. But I think what's really interesting is looking in that as a juxtaposition to, we still live in a global community, right? We still have to work with each other, and how do we sort of contend with both sides? Yeah,
very nice. Yeah, I think digital transformation is going to become something that's unstoppable and increasing. I want to move back. Oh, sorry. Please.
Oh, no, I think also what's really exciting about telemedicine, right? It's been around for a number of years, but really seeing a rapid transformation to more people tapping into that. And it has delivered some really tremendous benefits to communities that normally don't have access or easy access to healthcare, right? So thinking about, providing that to Navajo nations or these more depressed areas, and giving them more visibility and more accessibility. I think it's been a tremendously positive impact.
I have something that we are investing and announcing later in this month, so I can't talk about it, but this is exactly about democratizing medicine and making it more available, more widely and everywhere. So I can't talk about it, but I will tell you later, Victoria.
Oh, excellent.
So I want to go on something you mentioned, which I think is also part of the expectations. You mentioned about $200 million of royalty income. So clearly there is an element of engagements where it's transactional, or at least one element is. Could you talk a little about this expectation and how to make sure that it is actually a win-win?
Yeah, so that speaks to our royalty income from FY 2018, which almost half of that was one-time extraordinary income. So yes, there's the transactional piece, and I would say the top 5 inventions really accounts for a vast majority of that income distribution. So it's really about the home runs that you have, right? But our pipeline is larger than that. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is not just looking at revenue generation through licensing or knowledge transfer through licensing, but also can we work with VCs, with with CVCs, with seasoned entrepreneurs and operators to actively build companies based on high potential commercialization IPs. So really thinking about venture creation, and can we, it's a very high touch process, but if we can build a couple of those right, they can create massive value. Very,
very nice. And you mentioned you have medical centers, 5 of them, national laboratories, 3 of them. How does, let's say, for example, your POC fund, how does that help once you decide to invest in one of the startups and you allow this POC fund? Do you also, if they need to, do you facilitate access to these labs and these medical centers? How does that work?
Yeah, absolutely. So the thought is, yes, introducing all sorts of connectivities that really enhances just the funding aspect. I'll give you an example with COVID. At the onset of this pandemic, our unit was asked to look at UC technologies that exist to help to address COVID. So focusing on contact tracing and testing, diagnostics, and so forth. So once we found that short list of targets, we made introductions to UT Health, right, our hospital systems, and various parts of different campuses, so that we can share, right, potential technologies that can help them. So we do try to make introductions because UC could be customers, right, users of these technologies as well.
Very nice. And do you have any interesting outcome from this you could share?
Yeah, I know some of our hospitals are already, looking at these technologies and see if they can take that to market. I think, particularly in the contact tracing and the testing areas, we're seeing a lot of interesting technologies and companies that quickly pivoted to develop testing capabilities that can turn around tests really, really quickly. I think it's UC also working with the communities. Some of our campuses have been asked by local public health officials to help with local testing as well. So the technology, it really doesn't stop at our campus borders, but really can go beyond into the communities to help address those issues.
Very nice. We're getting to the top of the hour, but I want to give you a chance to say, what is your biggest ask, or what it is that the audience, if they could help you the most with?
I think my focus is this proof of concept fund, the gap funding that I'd like to raise, that could really help, bolster this innovation pipeline. So, love to work with, and this is not the only ask, right? If anybody, we'd love to work with CVCs and VCs and just the whole community to work together to help transform these great discoveries and innovations to the marketplace. So yeah, reach out and love to connect.
Very nice. Is there a place where we can find more about the POC Fund? Is there a web page or something we can learn more, or we just have to go to you?
Well, no, like your investment that you haven't disclosed yet, I will have some things soon, but this is all something that I'm developing right now.
More to come.
Yes, yes, more to come from me and you.
Very nice. Can you give us a feel about the POC fund next year? How many startups do you plan to fund with this POC fund, if everything goes well?
Yeah, so I'm looking to raise, 5 to 10 million as this initial, my initial effort, and we're looking to fund about, 150 companies. So that is the target, but our ecosystem is so vast and the need is so great. So really thinking about, do we want something that's sort of vertical specific to start with? Do we want a general fund? But also always thinking about the diversity aspect to that, right? Can we, sort of give more opportunities for underrepresented communities?
Very nice. And for the audience, I will remind the 14x ROI that you have seen. So this is clearly a good place to have a positive impact to the society, the community, the world, but also clearly financially. So thank you, Victoria. It was a treat to have you, and thank you for sharing your initiatives, what you're doing. I think the audience really loved it. I'm sorry I couldn't ask all the questions, but it was really a good starting point for people to want to know more, and we will make sure your contact details are available. Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you, Nicolas. And thanks again to the 500 Startups team for this great series of discussions. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.